One more thing before I jump into my message, just want to mention this. So if you were here in November, maybe you remember I was gone, our executive pastor RJ were gone, and a couple other people for a week. We were in the Dominican Republic. We spent a week there visiting several different churches and looking at projects for us to, what hopefully our desire was to start a partnership with a church down there where we'd have multiple mission trips that would go down over an extended period of time and really pour into a church and pour into a community. Well, we did land on a church and felt God kind of opened up a door with a church. It's in the city of Banao, which is, I don't know where it is. It's in the DR. That's where I know. So it's in the city of Banao, and I met the pastor, Ariz, and her husband, Kabar, and just really excited about that opportunity. And so I wanted to mention it on a Sunday morning because we have a trip scheduled. It's July 28th through August 5th. So it's that week, and during that week, there'll be some construction that we'll do. There'll be Vacation Bible School. There'll also be some sport camps that we do. So that'll be the week that we're going. And so if that, the idea of global missions, going to another country and working with people there, if that kind of sparks something in you, we would love for you just to hear about that trip and what it looks like to be a part of it. It's about $1,500 is the total cost, and that covers most everything while you're there. And so if you're just interested, we're having a meeting the last Sunday of the month, March 29th, after the last service. You can scan the QR code. You can let us know that you're interested. And we'd love to talk a little bit more about that trip and what it could be like to be a part of it. This won't be the only one. There'll be multiple trips over the next several years, but this will just be the first one. So if you're interested, let us know. So I'll start with this. And you might end up judging me for this, and that's fine. I can certainly handle it. But I absolutely love Dr. Pepper Zero Sugar. Like that's my drink. That's what I go to. And I know you might be thinking, diet soda. I don't care. I'm pretty good about everything else in my diet and everything else in life. And so this is my thing. This is my thing. So Dr. Pepper Zero Sugar. Now I will drink other diet sodas, but they're nowhere near as good. This is my favorite. This is my go-to. Drink it all the time. But as I've gotten older, my family says I've gotten more picky about what I like to eat and drink and all that kind of stuff. And I just think my tastes have gotten more refined as I've gotten older. I'm not more picky. But when it comes to Dr. Pepper Zero, I have perfected it. I have a system, and I've got it down so good. And here's my system. First, the ice matters. And it's got to be pebble ice. I don't want your crescent ice. I don't want your ice cubes. It has to be pebble ice. Last Christmas, we got one of those pebble ice makers. And since we got that, I've crossed the line. I can't go back the other way. Like it's the only thing I will have in my Dr. Pepper Zero. And here's the second thing. And this might sound weird, but to me, it matters. So, it's got to be cold even before I pour it into the cup, like with the ice. And I get it, right? The ice makes it cold too. Now, it's got to be cold before I even pour it into the ice. The colder, the better. If you can get it to that point where it's about to start to turn to, have ice crystals in there, that's even more perfect. But it's got to be cold. Doesn't matter whether it's a can or a bottle that it's coming from, but it's got to be cold before I pour it in. All right, so that's requirement number 2. And then the third thing, the cup matters. I don't want a styrofoam cup. I don't want a plastic cup. You've got to have one of those metal insulated cups. That's the only thing that I will, but it's just not as good if I drink it in anything else. So that's the third thing. And then the last thing, I don't want to drink it out of a straw, and I can't explain why, but I feel like it ruins it. Maybe it gets warmer as it goes to the top. I don't know. And I don't like even the lid on the cup. It's got to have no lid. My lips have to touch the ice and the Dr. Pepper Zero Sugar to make it the perfect drink. And so that's it, right? That's my requirements. That's the perfect drink. It's so refreshing, and there is nothing like it. And you might think, well, that sounds a little obsessive, that sounds a little crazy, but here's the deal. Let's move past just what I drink to quench a thirst. We all have something in our lives that's along the same line. And I'm not talking about with this, I'm not talking about a literal thirst. There's in all of us this deeper thirst that we all have, and it's maybe something that you feel more in your soul. Because I think for most of us, none of us wake up in the morning thinking, well, my soul is really thirsty. But you're like me. Right? You wake up in the morning thinking, man, I just wore out. I'm just tired, or I'm just stressed, or I'm just anxious, and man, I just need a break, or I just need this season to be over with. And there's this thing that maybe seems to be missing, and it doesn't even necessarily feel spiritual. But in you, it just feels like something's off. And you've said to yourself, man, I just need a little more space. Or, if I could just have a little bit more control over some of these other areas of my life, or if I could just get a little bit more affirmation, just a little bit more encouragement along the way, then I'd, feel fulfilled. I'd feel like that's enough. And we don't really call that a thirst. We might just say that's life. But there is this part of us that at times feels thirsty, and we want more, and we think, man, I just had a little more of this, or just had a little more of that. If I could just slow down, or if I could just get through this week, or if I could just catch my breath. And for you, it might be a literal thirst for control. That you just feel, a little bit more calm, a little bit less anxious when you're in charge. When nothing's catching you by surprise. Maybe there's this thirst for, some validation. And it's not bad. You just want to be noticed, or you just want to be affirmed, and you want to feel like what you're doing actually matters. You might have a thirst to kind of escape. And maybe that thirst is for a screen or a substance, some kind of distraction to get your mind off of what you're dealing with right now. Something that, lets you check out for a little bit. And here's the thing when it comes to things like that. Your brain, my brain, that's how we're wired. That when you hit that point, or hit that season, or hit that stage where you feel empty, or you're feeling stressed, or you feel, overwhelmed, there's just this part of us that's always looking for what's going to help me feel better right now. What's going to help kind of take the edge off? What's going to kind of help me get through this season, or make things a little bit easier, or help me to relax a little bit? And we usually we reach for stuff that's going to take the edge off, to give us that moment of calm, to make, just bring a little bit more calmness to our life. And the thing is, right, our brains are wired for this, and our brains kind of take note of it and think, man, that kind of helped. That helped for a little bit, and it kind of feels better. And so next time you feel that stress, or the next time you feel some of that anxiety, or the next time you feel like, man, you're just overwhelmed, what do? You reach for it again. And you reach for it again. Because it worked. Because in some way, for a little bit, for a moment, for a season, for a little time, it calmed you down a little bit. And it distracted you a little bit, and it took the edge off. But that's the problem. That's the problem, right? So often those things that you and I reach for when we feel stressed, or when we feel anxious, or when we feel just things are off and just need a break and just need to relax, so often they're just not enough. They're just not what we need. That there's this part of us that desires something deeper. And that those temporary things are never going to completely satisfy that. And right, it's one thing when it comes to, a physical drink like my Dr. Pepper Zero, but it's another thing when it comes to our souls, when it comes to deep down. And so, what is that? What is it, that part of us? So to kind of dig into that, we're in this series called Seeing Jesus. And we've been looking, and we'll continue to look over the next few weeks, at these pictures of Jesus. That as you read throughout Scripture, Jesus talks about himself with certain imagery in place. The first century writers of the New Testament, they would talk about Jesus, and they would use imagery, pictures that made sense to the audience that was listening at the time. I mean, everyday images that people understood. Jesus talked about himself as that he was the light, that he's the bread of life, that he's a shepherd, that he's the door. And so you have all these images throughout the New Testament, these images and these pictures, that their intention is to help us see who Jesus is, who he really is, and what he wants to do in our lives. And so the one picture I want to take a look at today, I think is one of the most personal of all the pictures that we see throughout the New Testament, because it speaks directly to your thirst and my thirst, and that desire to reach for something else when we're feeling stressed and anxious and worried and overwhelmed and not enough. And so in John chapter 4, Jesus uses a phrase for himself, and he says, I am living water. He makes a statement, I am living water. And just to give you a little context to when Jesus was saying that. So at the time, Jesus was traveling from Judea to Galilee. And he had his disciples, they were going along with him. And on the surface, just looks like another trip, but there's a little problem. The shortest route from Judea to Galilee is through the region of Samaria. And in Samaria, there's Samaritans. And Jews and Samaritans didn't get along very well. And so Jews, even though from Judea to Galilee, it was a straight shot through Samaria, that was the quickest route, Jews would always go around. They would never walk through Samaria. And so Jesus decided, that's not what I'm going to do. And so what Jesus decided to do, he's going to go through Samaria. And as he does, there's another interesting thing that happens along the way. Jesus, he stops to rest, and he tells the disciples to go on ahead to town to grab something to eat. And this leaves Jesus alone at a well in the middle of the day. And so we pick up in John chapter 4, verse 7. We find out that soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, he says, please give me a drink. And just to give you some context for wells in first century in Palestine, they were very social places. They were places where people would gather. And generally people would come in the morning and they would come in the evening and they would come a lot of times with other people. And so we get this detail right at the very beginning that this woman comes alone and she comes at noon. And obviously there's got to be some reason behind that. The reason is she's avoiding people. She's avoiding people, so she comes alone by herself. And then all of a sudden, Jesus, he asks her for a drink. Might not sound like a big deal, but it really is. Because in that time, that day and age, in their culture, for a Jewish man to even talk to a Samaritan woman, even a rabbi, right? Jesus was a rabbi. It just didn't happen. It was not supposed to happen. And then add to that, in general, just men were not, they weren't going to ask women for help like that. And so it was really shocking that Jesus would even speak to her in the first place, let alone ask her for a drink. And John actually tells us her reaction. It says this, that she was surprised because she knows, right? Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. And so she just says it out loud, what everybody else would have been thinking. She says, Jesus, you're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. Why in the world are you asking me for a drink? And in her mind, this is all about categories. It's about ethnicity. It's about gender and religion and some social rules. And in her mind, there are some lines you don't cross, and Jesus just crossed them all. And so she's not even being rude by asking this. She's just being realistic. And Jesus, in the moment, he doesn't correct her, because she's right. There's some real history, some real tension, real reasons that these two cultures didn't mix. But Jesus isn't having the same conversation that she's having. And so that's why Jesus responds this way. He says, if you only knew the gift that God has for you and who you're speaking to, you would ask me, and here's when he says it, and I would give you this living water. And still, all she can think about is these social barriers that Jesus has just crossed. And Jesus is focused on something completely different. And she thinks this is about, a drink of water. And Jesus knows that it's about something deeper. He knows it's about her life. And I love that he doesn't start trying to fix her behavior. He starts by acknowledging her thirst. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, I think this is where the story might get a little more familiar with each of us. Because I think a lot of us live right there, maybe where we're having one conversation in our heads, but Jesus is having a completely different one. Where we're focused on what works, what's manageable, what's going to help me get through the day. And Jesus, he's paying attention to what we keep going back to when we're feeling empty and feeling stressed and we're feeling overwhelmed. That's what he's focused on. And so look at how she responds. She says, but sir, something missing here. You don't have a rope. You don't have a bucket. And this well is very deep. And so that's great. But where are you going to get this living water? And she still doesn't understand. Right? Jesus, you don't have a bucket. This well is deep. How's this even going to work? And in her mind, she's still thinking about the logistics. She's still trying to figure out, okay, this living water, how's this going to make my life easier? And Jesus, in that moment, he raises the stakes, because he's no longer talking about how. He's talking about what happens when you keep drinking from this well. And he continues, he says, anyone who drinks this water, it's just natural. You'll become thirsty again. But, he says, those who drink the water that I give, that I have, will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life. And Jesus makes this huge statement. Jesus says, this water, you brought your bucket, you showed up here in the middle of the day, the water that you came for, it can help you for a moment. It can help you for a little bit, and it can get you through today. But he says, what I'm offering, it changes where life comes from. Jesus isn't even offering better water. He's offering a different source in this moment. And he says this living water, what that is this ongoing presence of God in your life, a source inside of you that doesn't depend on the circumstances around you. And so it's not about better conditions, it's about a different kind of life flowing from within. And in her response to Jesus' comment, she still doesn't get it. And she says this, she says, please, sir, give me this water, and I'll never be thirsty again, and I won't have to come here to get this water. In other words, she's still thinking, hey, man, this sounds great. This is convenient. You got something else for me? This is efficient. This is a whole lot easier. I'll take whatever you got. If you can make my life less exhausting and less overwhelming, I am interested in that. And it's important to notice, because she, like us, right? When things get stressful, when things get overwhelming, when you're filled with anxiety, you feel out of control. Here Jesus is offering something deep. But so often your instinct and my first instinct is, what can you give me that's manageable? Right? I just want some relief. But here Jesus, he's offering renewal. But you, me, give me fewer trips to the well, right? Make it easier. Jesus, he's offering a new source altogether. And that's the tension in this story. She comes to the well looking for something that's going to get her through the day. And Jesus is saying, hey, no, I've got a different source for you altogether. And that's still the invitation. Not something to help you better cope with what's going on in your life. Not even fewer trips to the well. Not a more efficient version of the same life. Jesus says, no, I've got a different source. Because, right, you've prayed. Jesus, I need you to get me through this season. Things are out of whack. Things are crazy. Things are chaotic. Jesus, I need you to get me through this season. But it's likely that the truth is, it's not just a season. For you, it's been going on for years. And every night when you crawl in bed, you're exhausted. All the while, you're still reaching for the same distractions that keep leaving you just as empty as it did the day before. Right? You've prayed for peace, because who doesn't want more peace in the world that we live in? But I think sometimes what we really mean is, Jesus, could you help me keep my exact same schedule without feeling overwhelmed by it? Right? You've asked, you've prayed, God, would you bless me? But sometimes it's probably more of a, would you bless what I'm already doing? Even though you know deep down what you're doing, or even what I'm doing is what the very thing that's draining you. I mean, you've prayed, I've prayed, God, help me with anxiety. All the while, you keep refreshing the email and checking the phone and replaying conversations, trying to control every outcome possible. You've asked Jesus to help in some of your relationships. And that's a good thing to pray for. But what happens when you're still expecting that spouse or that friend or even your kids to give you that sense of worth or give you that sense of security that only Jesus can? And maybe you've prayed, Jesus, just help me feel content with my life, or just help me come to a place where I'm good, where I'm okay, and I feel content. All the while, still starting your day with scrolling or comparing or measuring and quietly feeling behind before your feet ever hit the ground. And none of that stuff means that you don't love Jesus. But so often it leaves us thirsty and empty and never quite is enough. And so as the Samaritan woman, she responds to Jesus, she says what you would say, give me this water. That's what I want. Now, Jesus, at this point, he says something that's completely out of left field. He tells her, I want you to go back home, grab your husband, and come back. And now the tone of this conversation completely changes because, this conversation up to this point, it's been interesting, a little strange. But for this woman, now it gets personal. Because when someone says, go get your husband, he's not talking about water anymore. And the Samaritan woman responds kind of carefully. She says, well, I don't have a husband. She gives Jesus a short answer, very minimal detail, kind of being defensive without, being really defensive. And Jesus responds and he says, yeah, you're right. In fact, and Jesus names it, he says, you've had 5 husbands. And the guy you're with right now, he's not your husband. And I just want you to imagine, can you put yourself in her shoes? Here she is in the middle of the day. She's trying to avoid any kind of contact. She's alone at a well. And then she's talking to the stranger. And then suddenly this stranger knows her relationship history. He knows the thing that back in town, the thing that people whisper about. He knows the reason that she showed up here in the afternoon and not the morning. And to me, what's remarkable about this story is that Jesus doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't shame her. He doesn't condemn her. He simply names the well. He says, this is what you've been drawing from. This is the thing that you've been trying to get your identity from. This is the source that you've been going back to over and over and over again. He says, or you've been looking for life in relationships. You've been looking for that security and that identity and that belonging in all these relationships. And every time it ran dry, every time it got to the point where it just felt like it wasn't enough and you were still thirsty and felt like you were missing something, you went back somewhere else for another drink. And that's where this story, I think, stops being about her and starts being about us. Because you, me included, we all have, in some ways, we all have one of those wells. That thing that you and I tend to go back to that thinks, this is going to be it. And this will give me what I need. And this will finally fill me up. And this will finally do that. Get me to that point where I won't feel like I'm missing something. And whether for you it's that promotion. You've been working and working and working and you have this goal in place and you think if I finally get to this and if I finally get that promotion, then I'll feel that fulfillment. Or maybe for you it's approval by the people around you. Think, man, if I can finally have enough people like enough things and then I'll feel like, that's enough. Or maybe for you, it's that relationship. Thinking that this relationship, it's finally going to be the thing. Or this is the time, this is the person. I'm finally going to feel fulfilled in this. Or maybe for you, it's control. Or maybe for you, it's achievement because you just need some of those pats on the back to say, hey, yeah, you've really done it. And, right, when it didn't fill you up, you did what we would all do, right? You tried again. Somewhere else. And this is what makes Jesus different because he doesn't shame that thirst. But what he does is he exposes the well. He exposes what she keeps drawing from. And he wants to do the same thing for you and I. Because here's what I think. Living water only makes sense once you realize, once you're aware, once you realize the well you're drawing from isn't working. That's the point. When you and I realize, this doesn't really fill me up. And this doesn't really do the trick. And this, in the end, it feels like it in the moment, but in the end, I know it's just never quite enough. So what well? So in that moment, Jesus, he names her well and exposes where she's been drawing life from. She does what most of us do. She pivots. She changes the conversation. She basically says, hey, since we're talking about religions and spiritual things, she says, some people, we say that we're supposed to worship, my Samaritan people, you're supposed to worship on this mountain. You Jews say that we're supposed to worship in Jerusalem. And so which one is it? She kind of changes the subject. Let's debate religion instead of talking about my own personal life. Let's argue about some location instead of looking at what I'm struggling with. And before we're too hard on her, I think you and I so easily fall into that trap. Because you've had some experiences along the way, maybe where you felt God pressing on something personal and you kind of move the conversation somewhere else. See, Jesus in this moment doesn't take the bait. He answers her, but goes to a deeper level. In verse 23, but the time is coming. Indeed, there is now, indeed it's here now, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. The Father is looking for those who will worship him that way. Why? Because God is spirit. And so those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. In other words, he says to this woman, this isn't about where you stand. This is about what's happening inside of you. Not about geography. It's about being honest. And to me, here's what I think is so powerful about this story. Jesus has just exposed her past. And now he says the Father is looking for people who will worship him in spirit and truth. Not in people that have it all together and have it perfect and have everything cleaned up, but truthful people. People that will be willing to stop hiding. People that will be willing to stop pretending. People who, would stop debating mountains and start dealing with their thirst. And that's where this whole thing starts to get a little bit tighter, because now this isn't about Samaritans and Jews. This isn't about even wells or buckets. This is about whether this woman is going to keep managing the conversation or if she's going to let it change her. And so after all that, she makes this comment and she says, well, I know that someday the Messiah is going to come and he's going to explain everything. I know, someday the Messiah is going to come and sort out all the confusion and sort out all the tension and bring some clarity to this. But then Jesus says something that he almost never says this plainly. He says this. He says, I am the Messiah. Right? No crowd, no announcement, no religious ceremony, just Jesus sitting next to a well in the heat of the day, and this woman comes along, and Jesus says, I'm the one. I'm the one you've been waiting for. I'm the one. I'm not here so you can have some good advice. I'm not here to improve your life a little bit. I'm not even here to help you manage this a little bit better. He says, I'm the Messiah, which means this is about way more than just water and worship. Not even about her past. He says, this is about me. And that's where things really shift for her. She's been trying to understand what Jesus is getting at, and now in this moment, she has to decide who he is. And that's where the story starts to turn and it gets really personal. Because if Jesus really is who he says he is, then for you and I, he's not offering to tweak our current well. He's offering you and me. He's offering himself. This living water is not a concept. When he says, I am the Messiah, he says, this living water, it's me. And then right after Jesus says, I'm the Messiah, the disciples happen to show back up and kind of the conversation stops. But John includes a detail right here at the end that would be easy to miss. And he says this, that the woman left her water jar beside the well and ran back to the village. She didn't get what she came for. She did not get what she came for. And so she goes back to the village and she tells everyone, come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he be the Messiah? Right? She came for water and she left without ever getting it. The jar, right? She came to get that jar full and now she leaves it sitting there. Why? Because she has found something better. And once you find something better, you don't cling to what brought you there. She came to take care of her thirst, to just get her through the day. And she leaves having encountered the source of life. And so she runs back to town, the very town that she's been avoiding. And she starts telling people, hey, right, the thing that she was so embarrassed to even, be around people about. She goes, hey, this guy's told me my entire past. He's told my entire past. He's told me everything that I've ever done. And the thing that she becomes most ashamed of, it's the very thing that she starts talking about. So she walked to that well, isolated, runs back to town. She's inviting people. She came empty, and now she's overflowing. And here's the part that matters for you and matters for me. you and I, it's so easy to just want to ask Jesus, can you help me manage this? There's this thirst and I feel it and I want more here and I feel a little, can you help me manage this? But if Jesus really is who he said he is, then he's not offering you and I better ways to cope with our stress. He's offering himself. And I mean, when we truly understand that, those jars that we've been carrying, we don't take them back home. That those wells that you've been drawing from, you don't need those anymore. And so maybe the real question for you and for me, what's the well? What's the well that you keep going back to thinking, man, this will do it, and this is it, and this is the thing, and you realize it's just never quite what you hoped it would be. What's the well? Because Jesus would say what he said to her, I'm the living water, and I've come to give you something that will fill you up in that way, in a way that will never, ever, ever will. And so what's the well that you've been drawing from? Right where you're at, would you just bow your heads with me? Dear Heavenly Father, I get it. It's so easy to settle for almost peace and almost contentment and almost rest, but you have so much more for us. And I think about this season and what Lent means as we move towards Easter Sunday morning. God, that's going to be a celebration. But in the meantime, this season is meant to refine us and change us and for you to work in us. And so, God, I pray that in this moment you'd help us see the wells that we've been drawing from and how that is just leaving us empty and never quite satisfying us. God, I pray that you would do some work in us over the next few weeks so that, God, that we're always, always, always drawing from the one true source, this living water, what you want to be for us. And with heads bowed and eyes closed, you might have walked in this morning, you're joining us online, and you felt it. And it's more than just even what we talked about today, but there's a bigger thirst. You need to know that your Heavenly Father loves you and desires a relationship with you. And in order to communicate that, he sent his Son into the world, not just to show us how to live and not just to teach us good things, but to give his life for you. And he wants to restore that relationship with your Heavenly Father. And so maybe at some point, maybe you walked away from faith, or maybe you've never quite felt how Jesus fits into your life. I just want you to know you can take that first step today with a very simple prayer right in your own heart, something that you can repeat like this. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for loving me. I want to draw from you. Forgive me of my sins, and today I choose to follow you. And so, God, for all of us, and there's some things that I know we're all drawing from that are just not doing the trick. You've wired us so that if we draw from you, the true source, God, that you will fill us up in a way that nothing else can. So, God, I pray that now in this season, God, you would just turn our attention to you in a way that maybe it hasn't in a while. But, God, that you would help us to draw from the one true source, the living water, which is you. God, we love you. We praise you. Amen.